Hi, I'm Deborah Hamilton. Welcome to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? 10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict. Hi, Deborah Hamilton here, Hamilton Law Mediation, and of course the Why Do Pets Matter podcast, back with the wonderful Valarie Adams. We're going to continue that conversation we had because conversation is what needs to be had on these topics. And Valarie was so generous with her time last time that I've asked her to come back and give us some more input and insight into how she navigated this communication highway for helping veterinarians, their staff, and pet owners understand each other. So Valarie, thank you so much for coming back. You rock.
You're my hero.
We're a mutual admiration society here.
For sure.
You were talking about a meeting that you had before we started recording at the Fox. Where was it?
So when we first, in 2008, when we first launched our hospice and palliative care program with Healing Heart Foundation, which was a 501c3, we introduced it to our community of veterinarians and veterinary clinics and hospitals in the area, and gave them kind of an overview of what a program like that can offer people. And it was received incredibly well because, of course, doctors want to do their best. Doctors and staff want to do their best, and they do a fantastic job right now with emergencies and chronic illnesses that are perhaps coming to the end of the terminal illnesses. Those types of conversations take such a great deal of time. They're sensitive. In general practice, it's a totally different thing because you have a relationship. So you, as the pet family, have a relationship with your veterinarian and the staff. And so you already have that level of trust. And so hopefully, if you've had a pet that has gone through, say, a chronic illness or has been diagnosed and you've been treating a terminal illness, whatever the situation is, you're coming to the end of it. And those conversations about when the time comes should be starting to be looked at. In hospice work, we say hospice isn't about dying, it's about living. And that's truth. But a little bit as we nudge our way and dip our toe in the water as perhaps a condition is deteriorating, is a really good idea to start prepping people for when that time comes. And hopefully, if it's done skillfully, in a lot of cases, you can actually enrich that relationship as you're getting to the end and leave room for things like honoring instead of deep regret or deep guilt, which is quite often, the case.
It's such an emotionally charged conversation on both sides because the veterinarian wants to do what's best for the pet owner wants to do what's best for the pet. And how do you have that conversation? A lot of people say, well, if you know your veterinarian really well, just say, what would you do if it was your dog? And I think that question is so difficult for a veterinarian to answer because A, it isn't their dog, and B, it's everybody's individual choice. And so this emotionally charged conversation really needs to have some leadership training on how to really handle it, for both the veterinarian, the staff, and the client.
Absolutely. We talk a lot of times, every time I turn around, I think I'm listening to somebody saying we need to put this in a container. This is in a container. This is in a container. I talk about it as entering that space. And as we love Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, who says,
Yep.
be responsible for the energy you're bringing into that space. Those conversations are extremely difficult. Now, I will say, if you have, and hopefully people have a really good working relationship with their primary care doctors, and it's not unusual to have, lots of specialists come into play. These allergy dogs, people are on, my brother was on a first name basis with his his allergist. So for his dog, of course, he had a white dog in Florida. What was he thinking, right?
Yeah. You don't think of these things. You think of what would really work for your life, and you don't think of the environment too, which you should.
No, but he was quite committed. So it was wonderful. But I mean, they had a really good relationship because they saw each other a lot. And if you have that kind of a relationship, and I'm hoping people do with their primary care doctor, that they can start, as things are moving right along. These conversations aren't like, we don't have them one day, we have them the next. What do you want to do when? That kind of conversation, we should be nudging our way into those conversations long before we're here. Now, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
The problem herein lies is that, if it's an emergency case, this is where
that's an immediate conversation, right? If you just find out.
Oh, it's just,
but that's where a relationship, I think, really helps, because if your vet comes to you when they're removing the spleen, so to speak, this has happened to me twice, and they find that the pancreas or the liver are involved in a serious cancerous condition, you have to have that conversation. You have to trust that, your client well enough to have this conversation, because they didn't say goodbye to their dog when they went in to have their spleen removed, because that's what all that was happening, because that's all that showed up. And then you have to call them and make this difficult conversation, have this difficult conversation, make a decision. Neither one is wrong. Neither one is right. You have to have this open conversation. I'm sure you've had that a number of times.
Well, I'm thinking right now of a story where that is completely was exactly the case, and it turned out to where we became wonderful friends many years later. So, typical standard poodle dog this was, that went in for turned out to be hemangiosarcoma. So we are doing surgery in the middle of the night, and I get a call at 10 o'clock at night and said, these folks are going to surgery with this dog. We really think they would benefit from a conversation with you. And I said, sure. Do you want me to call them in the morning? Nope. Tonight will be probably
just fine.
Yeah. So within minutes, I was calling them, and they were waiting at the phone for me because they had been told that someone would be calling them who had experience in this. And so we ended up bringing this boy into hospice care, and he was in hospice care, I think, for about a week, where we were at the house. And I think it was a week, maybe a week and a half. It was a short period of time that he was in our care. And so coming into that, though, these people were armed with information. Information is power. Yep. And don't throw tomatoes out there, anybody at me. Don't send me nasty emails. But I kind of, when they would tell me we looked it up on the internet, I say, I don't have a problem with you looking at things on the internet. How about I give you sites to go to, though, where I know, the information is accurate, and I like you to have as much information. My job is to give you information. My job is not to tell you what to do.
Right.
So
right.
they went into their hospice knowing as much as they possibly could with the possibilities coming up. They were grateful for every time. And when he did bleed out again, and he did because there were other organs involved where the cancer had spread, and we felt that pretty strongly, prepped him again coming up to it. And even at that point in time, when he started bleeding out again, I said, we're here. And so it was a question of back to the hospital and getting blood transfusions, or because you can change your mind, you can change your mind. This is not a in concrete, in stone here. So when it did come time and he did bleed out again, they were given the option. We can go back in, we can have some blood transfusions, but you are already armed with that information, and you already know where the end result is going to come. So they ended up being just the most incredible advocates, because I actually did a lecture somewhere, and I had a doctor. Oh, it was 4 days. I'm sorry. I remember it was 4 days now that he was in our care. 4 days. That's like nothing.
That's like nothing, right?
That's like nothing. And so a doctor said to me from the audience, "What's 4 days?" And I said, interesting you should say that, because their very words to me were, we wouldn't have traded those 4 days for anything. You couldn't have bought those 4 days from us.
Right. Because it's a process. Now, either you do it with the Band-Aid ripped off, or you take 4 days, which is sort of like a Band-Aid ripped off, but a little less, or you take a different tack. But having that conversation beforehand, as you said, giving them the information they needed, the correct information they needed, appreciating they went to Dr. Google, and then you said, great, now let's apply it to Fluffy and see what would work for Fluffy, and then moving from there. But the bottom line is communicating in an effective way, so that the veterinarian feels they've given the information to the client that's necessary, and the client has received that information in a way they can really assimilate it.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that to absolutely respect what everybody's different points of view are going to be.
Yep.
Because
go ahead.
4 days would not be enough to some people. 4 days were everything to this family. So assume out the window, and get into that space where everybody comes with their own baggage, their own reasons, their own little complexities, and honor that.
And if your client comes to you and says, what would you do? Dr. Adams, what would you do? Say, I really can't say, because I'm navigating this at the same time you are. So let's all find out the information together, and together we will, make a plan. And that plan is subject to change, as you said. It's not written in stone, but we'll make a plan for the next 24 hours and then the 24 hours after that. I had a Hermangio dog who lived 6 months, 9 months, based on holistic and based on, an incredibly committed owner. And he lived every life to the fullest. And, one morning he woke up, gave her a look, and she goes, "Today's the day." She took him out running in the field, because he was a field dog as well. And he did a little bit of running. And of course, you had to go to the obligatory McDonald's, right? And then she, brought him in, because that was what she had promised him. She promised him that the day he felt miserable was the day he would let her know that that was the day. And
I think that skillful communication is really, that's the hallmark of a clinic.
Yep.
Is skillful communication, and it takes a lot of time. And that's one of the hindrances right now, is that everybody is so busy, and these conversations take a lot of time. So perhaps for families to make an appointment with your doctor, take an appointment slot, take one of the appointment slots dedicated to discussion of what's going on, or
and that vets have to make those slots available, because like I was trying to find a vet here in North Carolina, no one would make a spot for conversation available. And I think that is one of the greatest hindrances to building that relationship that veterinarians can have with their clients. And I get it, but if I'm willing to pay the $150 to come in and fill a slot, I know there might be a sick dog and I'm willing to wait. If a sick dog comes in at my appointed chit chat time, yes, absolutely. But then we need to reschedule, because I think, and because I'm a pet owner, I think the communication between the pet owner and the vet is as important as the critical care when we need it.
Well, it goes hand in hand. I don't think it's one or. I
Right.
think it's both. And after, working with internal medicine doctors and emergency doctors and oncologists and neurologists, their jobs are layered. I will say they're layered jobs, and they usually have people working with them that are also skilled too. So I like to look in terms of a pet care liaison. I like somebody at a facility who has a special interest, perhaps some varied skills where it comes to this, maybe a little more experience. And dedicate that person maybe to something like that.
And yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes I'm not the best communicator for someone, or on some topic or whatever. I'm just not the best. But if I have someone in my team who is, I think the most important piece is to own it. So I'm not really the best person to talk about hospice with you or what's going to happen next. But Valarie, this is what she does, and we have her here in the practice to help people do this. And I would love to set up some time with you and Valarie to talk about it, not just say, well, Valarie does that in our office. No, own it. Own the fact that this is not your magnificence. I have a lot of things that I'm magnificent doing. Cleaning is not one of my magnificence, and I own it. And it is what it is. I keep things pretty clean, but I'm not sort of like a toothbrush person. My husband's a toothbrush person, which thankfully I married a toothbrush person. But those are the kind of things that I think are more impactful if you own what you aren't willing to do, either because you're not good at it or you just don't want to do it. It's too emotional for you. Like I said, this is an emotionally energy charged conversation. So if this doesn't make you feel good, either take some courses to figure out how to do it or hire someone who does it well and then say, that's why I hired Valarie. I hired Valarie because she is so much better at having this conversation and having us work better as a team.
Well, that's the person that really should be sitting down with you. These types of conversations, we used to do trade shows and animal shows, and how powerful they were when people were walking through and seeing what we did and walked as far away as they could, just like they were going to catch something. So death and dying is just not, we are all so uncomfortable about it. I don't care if it's with ourselves or if it's with our pets. And so those conversations, and then they come with us. We are messy. How did you grow up? What are some of the values that you're bringing with you? What's your belief system? How fearful are you about many different things? Maybe you had a really bad experience and you never want to go through that again. There's just so many different dynamics that go into a conversation like that, that to have somebody on your staff, that can sit comfortably in that uncomfortableness, and know how to guide the conversation. That's a real skill.
It really is, and it's a skill that isn't as appreciated as it should be, because it's a soft skill, as they say. They use these terms, soft skills, and the soft skills of listening aren't necessarily as appreciated as the ability to give information. Sometimes, and I'm sure you've had many experiences where you just needed to listen to the client.
Well, first of all, I never did like the term soft skill. I feel my hackles kind of raise when that happens. Maybe years ago when we first heard the term, and once you get to my age, then you've heard these terms back then, and now they're, it's kind of like mentor. I'm kind of avoiding mentor because everybody's got a different definition of it. And so it's like, well, what does that really mean to you? So somebody threw a apprentice out at me the other day. I thought of my farrier right away. They usually sometimes
Apprentice.
come with an apprentice. But I think the point is that we all have such different definitions for things. So if I put 6 people in a room and ask 6 people, what does quality of life mean to you? What does suffering mean to you? We may get a whole bunch of different definitions. So when it comes to end of life conversations, it's a lot the same way. Some people are going to consider end of life care for their pets when they're taking a couple of last breaths. Some people are going to want to plan on it when they first get a diagnosis of congenital heart or chronic heart disease. So it's what is your definition is going to come into that too. Maybe you are not going to need that much guidance. Maybe you are somebody who really you feel solid about your belief system, and there's not a lot of question in your mind what you're going to do. But more and more, as we move through these societal changes. And I was thinking about it this morning. Years ago, I said I was picking up a dog or a puppy and handing it back. And I said, here, I'll bring you back to mommy. Well, that woman almost chewed my head right off. Yeah. Now, this was probably 30 years ago, but right. I never forgot it. I never forgot that. It stayed with me through all my career, that person that chewed me out. That's not my kid. I got kids. And she did. She read me a good one. It was a teachable moment. And
that's how we have to look at it, right? It's a teachable moment. I had a colleague, a student in one of my programs that said that someone had chewed her out for holding up her finger. I think I might have said this in the last video, while she was listening to her heart. And she never did it again. It was a teachable moment, and it was totally innocuous. Like, here's your baby. Totally, nothing was meant by it. And then there are other people who really want you to refer to them as their fur babies and my children and members of the family and companions. And you're sort of like 87% of the universe now who has pets. Well, I shouldn't say the universe. I think it really is mostly westernized countries and nationalities that have made animals be more anthropomorphic than some cultures that hold animals in high esteem, but they recognize that they're animals. Like I love how Indian Native American treat the animals in a way that is historic and but not sleeping in their beds. I think that I might be totally wrong, but you have a close collaboration with the Native Americans and their animals. And so this is a whole different way to look at things.
Well, I think now moving forward, that's a really good point, because we have seen the changes since 2006 when we first formed the group to go into the reservation. And those of us that were originally on the ground there may have made notes that it's just it's flipped on the access, because we never used to see small dogs. Now we see small dogs that come in with their coats on when we're having clinics. So it is another affirmation on how we have societal changes with our pets, and hospice and palliative care and end-of-life conversations is going to be, I think, a little more commonplace now because of that position in our society. And that's a good thing.
It's a really good
thing. I celebrate that.
I absolutely celebrate better communication, open communication, transparency. I often suggest to veterinarians who are having difficulties with clients or with staff, sit down and take a minute to think about what you bring into the room. And you said this at the beginning, you really have to know what energy you're bringing into the room.
And not only is that most wonderful thing to note, but you said it earlier too, is the listening part. We're constantly told to listen, listen, listen. Oftentimes, what happens is that we're listening with the intent of how we're going to answer. So that pause while you're listening with your heart instead of the frontal cortex of your brain can really make a difference to somebody. They can feel you listening in a different way, hopefully. If you're doing some good deep listening, that's what they're picking up from you. And that creates a safety space. That creates a space where somebody feels perhaps a little more comfortable to give you a little more vulnerability.
Yeah, to
Because
be a little more authentic, to tell you a little bit more that you really need to know, that they're not afraid to share things that might have occurred, that might have created the situation they're in, that they're not afraid to speak candidly to you.
and wade into that uncomfortable and sit in the uncomfortable. Again, it takes time. It takes somebody that feels that they're up for that, that they might even like that kind of work where they can actually sit in an intimate circle with somebody. The heart work that I'm doing currently is just a game changer. It's a game changer, and you can't hear the same again. You can't hear it the same again. And so I don't respond often the same as before, because you're wading into that space. You're standing in that circle with somebody.
I love that you said the prefrontal cortex, because I often say, well, you're usually lost in your amygdala. And then you hope to get back to your prefrontal cortex because that's more the business, as relational kind of part of your brain, as opposed to just spurting out whatever comes out of your mouth from the amygdala. But now I'm going to add the heart, because quite frankly, if you get out of your prefrontal cortex and get into your heart, you're going to hear things that you won't hear. It's best not to be into your amygdala, absolutely, to be in your prefrontal cortex. But I always say, try to listen, to understand what they're saying, and ask open-ended questions to get more information, as opposed to just presuming what Valarie means by this. Because the language she uses, the words she uses may mean something different to you. And she won't mind if you say, tell me more about that. Or what did you mean? Today I did the same thing. I said, what did you mean by this word, using this word? And they explained it to me. And I said, this is fabulous, because now I understand how you meant that word. And it could have had 2 or 3 or 4 different meanings for me. But because I was really listening, really present, listening with my heart, something didn't sound right to me, and I asked you a question. And I know that the veterinarians probably listening to this are going to say, I don't have time to do that. And I get it, but as you said, it becomes second nature. It becomes something that, sort of like diagnostics. There are things that you do now that at the beginning you had to really think about doing, and now it's second nature. And if you just work on the breath, just work on the breath. I mean, if everybody would just take a deep breath, we would have so much less conflict, such better conversations, because we weren't trying to get to the end of it. I don't know how you feel, Valerie. That's my thought.
I do, and I used to have a great article called "The Art of the Pause." Pauses and spaces in between conversation is usually uncomfortable. But if you're in a heavy situation, just that can leave room for a lot to happen. I treasured each and every one of my hospice families. We entered into a space that was very intimate. We did sharing, which is that is a tricky little area. But if you're comfortable in that space, then it can be a deal breaker for your relationship. And it can be a deal breaker for the family that's looking at end of life. I'm going through some records right now, and I'm actually looking at some of the patients that we took care of. And I can honestly say, I'm not aware of it. We kept tether on many of them for quite a while, as they knew we would. And some we didn't. I mean, there were a couple that everybody is different. So everybody everybody wants to do it differently, and we honored that. But the ones that did want to keep a tether, and we weren't quite, as far as following through with them, we didn't deal with a whole lot of guilt and regret. And I think guilt and regret are one of those things that are just part and parcel so often. Guilt and regret.
Yep.
And I think that if we can navigate through this in a companioning way, as Dr. Walfelt will call it, companioning, we're not trying to fix.
Right.
There's no fixing. I can't fix your grief. You can't fix my grief. And loss is loss is loss. I'm not even going to try and compare loss. But if we've walked that together, side by side, and one of us has been solid feet on the ground while the other one perhaps was lifting up now and again, they didn't feel alone. They were sure. They were certainly grief-stricken and heartbroken and all the things that go along with loss. How are you going to mitigate that?
Yeah.
I can't mitigate that for you. You can't mitigate that for me. But if we've done a really good job of walking beside you, as well as we know how to do, then you're going to walk away incredibly sad. But you're going to look back and not regret the day or a minute, hopefully, or how it all came down.
That is the perfect way to end this segment. Valarie, we're going to have you back because we have so much more communication conversations to have. But I love you to death. This is Valarie Adams. And until next time, this is Deborah Hamilton Law and Mediation, and of course, this wonderful Why Do Pets Matter podcast. Thanks for coming and joining us today, Valarie.
I love you to bits.
I love you too. The Why Do Pets Matter podcast drops every Thursday and can be found on whichever platform you find your podcasts. Subscribe now, invite your friends, and I cannot wait to have you join me in these conversations.